Hi there, thank you so much for joining me again on this video. I'm really grateful for all your likes and views on the previous video posted. What we're going to do today is to find out a bit more about Judaism, and in particular Passover, one of the oldest, if not the oldest recorded ritual in the world. And we're going to find out a little bit more about why it's so significant in the Jewish faith. We need though a little bit of context. And in terms of timing of the Passover and the Exodus, when the Jewish people fled slavery from the Egyptians, one date that has come up is about 1446 BCE. However, it's often difficult to date these things, so about 1400 BCE seems to be sort of agreed time. Of course, these things may change according to new research and archaeology and so forth. But what's very fascinating is, of course, the Egyptians were the biggest empire of the time. They had a rule of northeast Africa for something like 30 centuries, which is a phenomenally long time. And the Jews were enslaved by the Egyptians, and they were able to escape. The Exodus is recorded in the Jewish holy book, the Tanakh, in the book of Exodus. And the reason why it's so significant is because it's when the Jews got their freedom. But a couple of things just to be thinking about before we press on and find out more about the Passover. One of the things to consider is how what it must have been like to escape, to flee from the Egyptians. Imagine to be under the yoke of the Egyptians, to be under their control. We're not just talking about being servants, we're talking about being slaves. The sheer enormity of slavery can never, ever be exaggerated too much. You are nothing more than property. You are expendable. And of course, your personhood was taken away from you. So when the Jews had a chance to escape from the leadership of Moses, it really must have been such an extraordinary moment. And of course, it was also a journey into the unknown, to go from what you do know, which is slavery, into the unknown must have been very, very terrifying, but also a sense of exhilaration. And I think a little bit of empathy goes a long way on this, and just reflecting upon the freedoms that we have. So let's find out a little bit more. And the Passover is celebrated with a special meal, the Seder. And the Seder meal follows a special order, okay, which is written down in the Haggadah, which tells the story of slavery and how the Jews escaped. And the first item on the Seder plate is a lamb bone, a shank bone. And it's not actually eaten, but it's about the symbolism. The 10th and final plague sent by God, Yahweh is the Jewish name for God, and we'll continue to use that just for continuity, was the death of the firstborn. And in Egyptian culture, the firstborn was given all the privileges, not just in terms of inheritance, but also the best food around the table, the family household, etc., etc. And when the angel of death came down to take the firstborn in each household, before that, Yahweh had instructed the Jews to kill a lamb and then to paint on the door frame the blood. And so when the angel of death came down, it would pass over, okay, the households, and therefore the firstborn would be saved. And that is why the lamb is there on the Seder plate. So it remembers how the firstborn in the Jewish households were protected from the angel of death. Another item which is on the Seder plate is an egg. Passover happens normally in early spring, and the egg is a symbol of new life. It's roasted in a flame after it's been hard boiled, and it very simply is a reminder of the animals that used to be sacrificed in the temple, and of a new beginning and a new fresh start. Okay, and the egg has of course become an important symbol in other religious traditions as well. The next item on the Seder plate is a green vegetable. Might be parsley, might be lettuce. And actually thinking about the Passover meal, different Jewish communities sometimes have different items on the Seder plate. And it's quite interesting looking at all the variations. Maybe that's for another video at another time. But it's a symbol of how, when the Jews were wandering in the wilderness after escaping from Egypt, they were there for about 40 years. And of course, it's a reminder that Yahweh sustained them through that time. Okay. And another item on the Seder plate is, of course, bitter herbs, normally horseradish. I'm not going to lie. I was once invited to Passover Meal, and it's a fantastic occasion. If you ever have the opportunity, then please really do consider going. And the horseradish is very, very warm, and it does bring, certainly in my case, tears to my eyes. And those tears are a reminder of the tears that were shed in slavery. Okay, so quite a poignant moment. My personal favourite item on the Seder plate, which I loved eating, was the carousette. It's a mixture of apples, which are my favourite fruit, wine, nuts, and also plenty of honey. The sweetness of the honey is there to symbolise the sweetness of freedom. But there's a serious aspect to the carousette, which it symbolises the cement of the bricks that the Jews were using to build the various buildings for the Egyptians whilst they were enslaved in Egypt. So I think that's something to consider as well, how this very, very sweet and very pleasant food symbolises a far more melancholic moment. And something which I've been rolling around in my brain and trying to understand and get to grips with is how it's fascinating how the Egyptian religion, where all its various gods and goddesses, Isis for example, was festooned the Egyptian sort of landscape with huge statues and icons, probably more than likely to have been built by the Jews themselves. And it was a huge and mighty empire. But isn't it interesting how, to the best of my knowledge, virtually nobody worships the Egyptian gods anymore? But the Jewish faith, this religion of slaves, a religion based on words and storytelling, a religion where you're not even allowed to write out the full name of God, as I've shown here on Google Slides, still survives today. And it's almost counterintuitive, isn't it? The rational part of your brain thinks, well, hang on a moment, surely a religion by the biggest empire of the time, with all that money, all that wealth, surely that should have continued. And yet it didn't. This tiny little religion by the oppressed, by a minority, survived and is still revered and cherished today. And I find that really interesting, and how it survived. And that's something you might want to think about, sort of to compare and contrast with. But there are other items as well during the Seder meal. And these aren't on the Seder plate, but they play an important role. There's always a bowl of salt water. And when you're having your green vegetables, you dip them in salt water and eat them. And that is a reminder of the bitter tears that were shed during slavery. There's also matzot, or unleavened bread. When the Pharaoh, after the 10th plague, said, okay then, off you go, to Moses and the Jewish community, they didn't have time to cook the bread properly in the ovens for it to rise. So it was this flatbread. You can still buy it today in mainstream supermarkets as well, if you want to try some yourself. And that's there as a reminder of that particular moment. And I also cannot fail to mention the wine. Wine is a symbol of freedom, a sign of being rich and wealthy. There is plenty of wine available at a Passover, and it's drunk at 4 particular times to remember the 4 promises that Yahweh gave to Moses. And it's a family occasion, and many words and phrases are repeated, and it's really a time to look forward for peace as well. And it's such a significant event, and I think it's really worth remembering how important it is to think about how food can be used in different rituals, and have a think about why is food such an important way or remembering an event. I was thinking about how you may remember certain foods as a child that brings back particular memories. I always used to like porridge with that sort of brown crumbly sugar on top, and when I had some the other day, that reminded me of my childhood in some way. And I think also with food and eating, it's a community event, and that can be a great way of sharing ideas as well. And whatever your age, you can take part in a meal too. It doesn't exclude. It's very much an inclusive event. So, as always, feel free to, amongst yourselves, comment. As always, if you wish to like and subscribe, but most importantly, enjoy your learning.